Welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Chris Graham.
And I'm Crystal Graham.
I am excited about today's show. I'm excited about every week, of course, but we have a longtime friend of ours that we haven't talked to for a while joining us on the show here, Eric Curran, a member of Stanton City Council. And before we bring Eric on camera, I just thought I'd give some background about how we've known Eric. We publish the Augusta Free Press, augustafreepress.com. And many years ago, I got a submission from a guy I'd never heard of before named Eric Curran, who wanted to write some environmental columns. And I read the first column and I said, of course, well written, very well reasoned columns, and it really educated me about environmental issues in a way that I had not been to that point. And seeing Eric go from of course, all the stuff he teaches, he writes, he's an environmental activist, he's a community activist. And to have known him this many years and now have him on our show is really exciting for me today.
Right, it is. And then, of course, we followed him as he made his foray into politics as well.
That's correct. And so let's go ahead and bring Eric on. Eric, thanks for joining us on the show.
Chris, that was really, really kind. Thank you. Well, it's really good to be here back with you two again.
It is great, from a personal standpoint, and then, of course, being able to share this with our viewers. You're in your second term now in Stanton City Council. Just started this in July.
Yeah, so we actually have May elections, which some cities in Virginia still have. It's to sort of separate them from the bigger races so people will actually know who they're voting for on city council. So yeah, I'm starting my second four-year term now.
So, let's start with some issues that we've talked about here on Viewpoints the last few weeks. And the Augusta County Courthouse issue, we've talked about it from the county perspective. And we had Bob Stewart on with us recently as well to kind of give some overview from a reporter angle. Now let's get some Stanton perspective on this county courthouse issue. Obviously, the county courthouse is located in downtown Stanton. It's been something that members of Stanton City Council, the members of the Augusta County Board of Supervisors have been working together on for a number of years. Now with the referendum vote, the county voters having said overwhelmingly that they do not want to see the county move the courthouse to Verona, what are the next steps from the Stanton's perspective as to how to address issues there at the courthouse?
So the short answer to that, Chris, is we're waiting.
Yes.
We're waiting to hear from Augusta County. And I think our mayor put out a letter just before the referendum saying that we would be very happy to talk to our counterparts in Augusta County. When the Board of Supervisors is ready to talk to us, we're ready to talk to them. Of course, the courthouse is in Stanton. And if the will of the voters, 67%, was to leave the county seat in Stanton and continue to use that beautiful historic courthouse, of course, it's the decision of Augusta County voters, but I know I was glad to see it because that building is an integral part of Stanton, and the Augusta County seat has been in Stanton for almost 300 years, so there's a lot of tradition there. Stanton is very experienced at renovating old buildings and taking stuff from the past and making it awesome for the present. And so I personally would really look forward to hearing from the supervisors about what their plans are. And I think we'll be very open to having an exchange of views with them and really wanting to make this work best for the people of Stanton and for the people of Augusta County.
Now, the majority of the Augusta County Board of Supervisors obviously favored moving it to Verona, and so now they're having to go back to the table. I know before they had kind of made that decision that that's what they wanted to do. They had some early discussions with Stanton about possibly working on a partnership. In many ways, the way that Harrisonburg and Rockingham have chosen to work together on the court system. And I'm just wondering, there were some figures thrown around at that time that Stanton might be willing to kick in some money, up to about $12 million, I heard, for you all to work together more regionally. Is any of that still on the table?
I think we're probably looking at an empty table at this point. I think we're probably going to have to start a new process. And I, of course, can't commit the city to spending any money on anything. But I do know that we're eager to hear from the Board of Supervisors. We want everything to work out well. We want the building to be renovated and look nice and be effective. And so I think we're flexible. And we know it takes money to fix stuff up. I think we also went through a process of education on our own side, and we saw that there could be some advantages for Stanton citizens in somehow connecting our court systems, whether it's just sharing space as we currently do with the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court, or maybe even having a more combined relationship of our courts, how it could save our citizens some money, how it could increase some efficiencies. I know that there's a lot of backups in the courts, if there's some ways that we could help move things along quicker. we're open to all sorts of ways that we can work together that would be good for Stanton citizens and for Augusta County.
And of course, the complicating factor with this is that this isn't the only thing that either Stanton or Augusta County has to deal with. And we could talk about another big agenda item on the plate for Stanton leaders to consider the next few years. Involves the high school. The school board's been working the past couple of years on plans related to R.E. Lee High School. The school board has settled on a particular plan of action. The city council, of course, doesn't weigh in as much on that as it does on the provision of funding in the end. But there's a big price tag associated no matter what Stanton does with what the future of R.E. Lee High School. And so let's talk about that issue a little bit. Where do things stand as far as the R.E. Lee High School project goes?
So Chris, as you said, the school board did a study a couple years ago. They presented the results to us. I think they had 5 or 6 different options that ranged from the least expensive renovation that would do the bare minimum to the most expensive option, which would be building a new school on a new site. And so we've had plenty of time to look at these options, to hear from different experts, to hear from school boards, to hear from people who work in the high school, to hear from parents, to hear from our citizens. We've had a lot of discussion about it, especially the last few months. And I think what we've come down to on City Council is, yes, our citizens don't all understand that City Council's role in this is just to decide how much money is going to go for this project. That's it. Once we give the money over to the school board, they'll decide really what to do with it. But of course, the amount of money will determine pretty much what they can do up to a certain point. So we're looking at 3 options. I think one would be a more inexpensive renovation. One would be a renovation that would include a new addition, which I think would cost $40 million. And then the top option we're looking at this point is a $50 million new school on a new site. Now that $50 million does not actually include the new site or preparing the new site. I've asked the city staff to give us an all-in figure for that $50 million. I don't know if it's going to be 55 million or 60 million, but in any event, it certainly is going to be more than 50 million because you have to buy the land, you have to prepare it, you have to fix the streets that go around it so they can take the new traffic. It's a lot of stuff involved. So we're looking at those 3 options at this point. I think we'll probably keep talking about it through December, and I think we'll probably make our decision in January about how much money to allocate to either build a new school or renovate the existing structure.
You know, Chris and I have had a lot of conversations over the years about the future of education. You teach at Blue Ridge Community College, you know, and we've seen a lot of colleges move to more online. You know, even our niece Kayla is taking some online classes through Piedmont Virginia Community College. And so I'm always curious about like where you see maybe education going in the future. And, you know, when they were talking about building the $75 million new school, you know, kind of thing, you know, I guess I look at it as, are we just going to have these big buildings and then maybe education takes a little bit of a different turn?
So I actually happen to work in 2 fields that's going to, that'll each have an impact on the school. Number one is education, the other is technology. And of course, education, you're right, Crystal. It's not as much about butts and seats anymore. Definitely not at the college level. It's a lot about internships and externships and experiential learning. The school board study also showed that on the high school level, it's the same thing. And so will students be spending as much time in classrooms as they do now, or will the high school of the future be more of sort of like a headquarters for students to do various activities and then come back together? And could it be like one of these sort of office spaces where you rent a desk kind of thing? I don't know. But the thing is, when you're building a project like this, you have to think not just 5 or 10 years ahead, but you have to think 20, 30, 40, 50 years ahead. And with things changing so much because of technology, it's really hard to know what's going to happen. It's impossible, of course. Nobody has a crystal ball. And so when it comes to technology, a lot of it's about internet access. And you can take an existing building and give it excellent internet access. And you know, you mentioned Blue Ridge Community College. I happen to have just taught this afternoon in the Houff Student Center. And they renovated and put a new addition on that building, which is very impressive. I've never enjoyed teaching at Blue Ridge as much as I do now because the room I'm in has got big windows, it's got beautiful views of the mountains, it's got plenty of sunshine, and I feel like my students are more cheerful, they're more eager, they're more energetic, and it's really impressed me of what you can do to take an existing structure and turn it into something that's really effective for education today.
And I think something to talk about too is the amount of money being thrown around here, at least in terms of just figures that are being discussed. We talked about this in Waynesboro when a similar kind of project was talked about. In fact, the school board there is settled on a $75 million project to build a new high school in Waynesboro. Kind of funny how these figures kind of can work out together sometimes. For communities the size of Stanton and Waynesboro, we're roughly 25,000 residents, which we're small cities, certainly. People who follow politics, government, and you hear billions thrown around and trillions thrown around, you say, well, gosh, $75 million, that doesn't sound like a lot. But the impact on the bottom line from Stanton's perspective, if the city ends up going the route of 50 million plus, whatever it may be the cost of going that route for a new school at a new location, whatever the cost may be, what is the long-term impact on Stanton for making that decision? What kind of constraints does that put on future decisions?
So we do have to think about both sides of it. Number one, we have to think about how can we provide our students and teachers with an excellent facility so our students can get the best education possible. On the other side of it, we have to think of how we can make it affordable for our citizens. Because any option at this point is going to mean us raising taxes. Of course, no politician likes to raise taxes. And it's understandable in a city like Stanton where we have a lot of retired people, a lot of people on fixed income, and a lot of people who never really rebounded from the 2008 recession. And now it's an uncertain political scene, it's an uncertain economy. And so I think that we need to be mindful of getting the most bang for our buck. We have a responsibility to our citizens not to raise their real estate tax rate too high. Stanton already has a 95 cents on the 100 real estate tax rate, which is the highest in the area except for Lexington, which is over $1, but it puts us equal to Charlottesville. It puts us higher than Waynesboro and higher than Harrisonburg. So I would have a problem with raising our tax rate much more. We can look at a couple other taxes. I think we're looking at the meals tax and the personal property tax. But again, raising those taxes too much is going to hurt our citizens. It's going to hurt our families. It's going to hurt our retirees. It's going to make houses harder to sell in Stanton. And so the other thing is we can't blow all our credit on one project. Cities are restricted by Virginia law from only taking out so much credit. And Stanton does pretty well so far, but we don't want to take out all our credit on just a high school. There may be some costs incurred with the courthouse. There may be some other things we want to do. We're talking about a public safety building. We're talking about some other improvements. And in an uncertain economy, it's just good financial practice to have some cushion for things that you never know are going to come along. So that's prudent financial management. I think we really have to be prudent, and we have to consider what our citizens can bear.
Have you thought about asking the citizens what they want? And I bring that up because the Augusta Courthouse, that issue was obviously put on the ballot. Waynesboro has put a couple referendums on the ballot in the last couple of years as well. Is there any thought as to weighing in to see what the citizens, might have to say about it?
So maybe after I say this, we'll get a bunch of new calls. We've been hearing a lot from citizens over, say, the last month. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to estimate that what I've heard from citizens myself and what I've seen at our city council meetings has been about 5-1 in favor of a renovation and addition, which would be the $40 million option.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So maybe switching gears a bit now, I mentioned the longevity of me reporting on issues in this area, and I don't like to admit sometimes that I've been a reporter for 20 years, but that shows some wisdom of tooth, maybe long of tooth there. Stanton has this reputation, and well-deserved, for having done so much to improve its central core, kind of growing out the downtown, all the work we've featured on our show here, both the work with the American Shakespeare Center, the work with the tourism department and the Beer Works Trail, and it kind of again growing from out kind of thing. I want to talk about on the outskirts of town, if we can say, on the edge of town, the Interstate 8164 corridor, and the foundational elements that have been put in place there over the last 10 years or so, both at the Frontier Museum property and also the Western State property, that are now we're starting to see some results of that, or about to see some results of that, and the impact that the development in those two areas can have on Stanton's bottom line. Maybe update us on what's going on in those two areas, and again, how maybe it can impact Stanton in a positive way down the line.
So I think in a sense, both those projects were sort of begun, the planning was begun before the 2008 recession.
Yes.
And so that really put a damper on a lot of real estate development. And it slowed down both those projects a great deal. Well, now we've started to see some recovery, and I think the first step was that the Frontier Culture made a deal with a developer to put in some stuff on their side of the road. And then we were able to sell the front, I don't remember, 16 or 20 acres or so to another developer. We're so glad that it was a local group who will put in a couple of hotels, some retail, and some restaurants. And so we were so lucky to get that land, 300 and some acres of the flattest land you're likely to find in Stanton. And it was a very good opportunity for us that the state didn't just take down their old hospital and rebuild a new hospital in the middle of it. And they weren't using most of that land anyway. So now they have a very wonderful new facility just behind it. But now we have the ability to develop this land, which is not only flat, but it's right at Interstate 64 and 81. So it's a good location. So I'm pretty optimistic about it. The plans for the developer sound very good. They sound like something that's very likely to succeed at that location and start to bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax revenue to the city, create jobs, and add some appealing options for our citizens.
We live in Waynesboro, and we've often talked about how much development has been going on there over the last, I'd say, 10 years? And ever since Walmart came, which we don't like to give, a lot of people don't like to give Walmart all the credit, but a lot did happen after Walmart came to the community. And they've said the opposite about Stanton, which is that you're very landlocked and that you haven't had as much places to develop in Stanton over the last 10 years. So some opportunities have perhaps gone to Waynesboro. So it seems like this project and this land that you've now captured, so to speak, right there at the interstate corridor might help answer some of that.
Sure, I think it will. And Stanton has put a lot of effort into our downtown.
Right.
I'm a downtown guy. I walk down Beverly Street, go to restaurants, theater, music. I love the historic architecture, but I also see that the stuff out by the highway is the stuff that brings in tax revenue. It gets a lot of folks, who just come off the highway and wouldn't make it to downtown Stanton. Number one, we can capture some of the tax revenue from their spending, but number two, possibly it can be sort of a gateway. Tourism gateway to help pull people off the freeway and get them to come downtown. So I think it complements what we do downtown. And with the economy improving, I think the prospects for both downtown and stuff out by the freeway are better than they have been in years.
One thing I think is neat that you guys have been able to do in Stanton over the years too is resist pressures, whatever pressures there may be. There's a lot of space, open space, green space in Stanton on the edges of town. I'm thinking the 275 corridor, if that's still 275, 262 corridor, that could, it's also close to 81. It could be valuable to some people if the city were to redevelop it and allow zoning and that kind of thing. But you've stood the line and said we're going to keep that green space because we value that. I know you serve as on the Ag Forestal Committee, I think, for the City Council. Talk about, so you put development in certain places, you encourage it in certain places, in certain places you say, no, green, this is going to stay green. Talk about that, if you could.
So I'd like to say that was part of a very smart plan, but I think part of that may have been just accident.
Okay.
I think in the 80s, when cities knew that they weren't going to be able to annex land from counties anymore, Stanton annexed a bunch of land to sort of tide us over for the future, for our future development needs. And we haven't wound up needing it. We do have an awful lot of land in the city that is zoned as so-called agricultural forestal district, which is a very unusual kind of zoning for a city. Mm-hmm. Normally, you don't think of a city as being a place with farms. But we got a lot of working farms in Stanton, and it's really beautiful to drive through them. And it's wonderful to think we do have that green space. I'm a big supporter of green space. I'm not sure that will all stay green space in the future. If there's some demand for development there, I think the city would be open to it. But I do hope that we can preserve a lot of it as green space. And I also hope that we can do something that they've done in Waynesboro, which is build a greenway. The Waynesboro Greenway is so awesome. It's such a wonderful example of an amenity using the natural strengths of the city that the citizens really value. And I know it brings us from out of town. We go to Waynesboro to walk the Greenway, and we go to one of the taco trucks, and maybe we go to a brewery. So it's a good thing for tourists and locals alike.
Yeah, that's neat.
Well, we talked at the beginning of the show about how we first got to know Eric, and it wasn't so much about Stanton City politics because he wasn't on city council back then,
Yeah.
but it had more to do with climate change, and it had to do, he mentioned technology and solar and that kind of thing. And so you've always kind of been on the cutting edge of that. And I think we have a few minutes left to maybe where we could talk about the recent election. There's a lot of talk about where we're going to be in the next 4 years as a result of the election. And I'm just curious with your background if you wanted to weigh in on that.
Sure, thanks. Well, and thanks for asking about that. The media didn't deal with the issue of climate change really hardly at all, and very little on the environment or energy. And I understand when gas is $1.98 a gallon, nobody thinks that energy is an issue, but gas won't always be $1.98 a gallon. It'll go back up again. The problem with Americans is we have a very short attention span for dealing with energy. And when we're in an energy crisis, that's not the time to get new sources of energy and start conserving. The time is now. And so number one, it's just an economic issue. But number two, yes, it's about not just our children's children, it's about us, climate change. And the election did not change the science. The outcome of the election did not abolish the science of climate change, which every single government of every industrialized country recognizes is a grave threat to human civilization, and that it's caused by humans. It's caused by us burning fossil fuels and cutting down trees and doing other stuff that heats the climate. And so only a few people argue about it in the United States. It's a little bit embarrassing to me that it happens in this country and not so much anywhere else. And I think that's because we're a little bit of a petro state. We're a little bit like Saudi Arabia. Oil companies have a little bit too much control over our government. And I'm sorry that the new administration seems to be working much more closely with oil companies and ignoring the science, but I think what that means for the rest of us, even in communities like this, where it's not like Hampton Roads, where people are seeing the sea level rise. You may think that climate change is not going to affect the Shenandoah Valley anytime soon, but it already has. Everybody knows that November, okay, it's cold today, but a few days ago, it was much too warm for November. The farmers will tell you that things have been changing. People who look at the seasons will tell you things have been changing. And it's not changes for the good. These are changes that are going to disrupt our economy, they're going to hurt our citizens, and they're going to endanger, not to sound too alarmist about it, but they're going to endanger the kind of civilization that we've grown used to for hundreds and thousands of years. So I think it's a grave problem. There are solutions out there. They mean using less fossil fuels and more clean energy and conservation. And I think it's going to be incumbent now with the federal government going the other direction. It's going to be incumbent on states and localities to do things to, number one, make ourselves resilient for a climate that's going to be much weirder than it's been in the past. And number two, to do our part to keep that climate from even getting worse.
Average viewer out there, we hear from a lot of viewers who value climate change as an issue and want to have us discuss it more, and we're glad to have Eric to help us do this today. So if you're the average viewer out there, you're listening to this right now and you're saying, okay, the Trump administration is probably going against my interest if you're a supporter of green initiatives and moving in the right direction on climate change. So the Trump administration may be moving away from my interest. What can I do? So talk to that person and say, what can they do to do what they can to hold the line for the next few years?
Two things. Number one, make changes in your own life, but that's not enough. Screwing in the energy efficient light bulbs is a good start, but if we all screwed in the light bulbs, it still wouldn't be enough. So number two, become a bit of an activist. Pay attention to what's going on in the news. Watch Leonardo DiCaprio's new movie. It's a documentary about climate change. It's very well done. It explains the issue, and it's also very inspiring. But get involved. Write letters to the editor. Write letters to your senators and congresspeople. Get involved with one of the environmental groups like 350.org or the Sierra Club, and then get involved locally too. There are many things that localities can do to make ourselves more resilient for the future, but also to cut our carbon. For example, encourage your city to put up more solar. That's what we're trying to do in Stanton. Harrisonburg has done an awesome job of putting up a lot of solar power, but still, it probably provides less than 1% of the energy used in Harrisonburg, and I know it does throughout the nation. So we could do a lot more solar. It's become a lot more affordable. I would encourage citizens to demand more solar power, especially from their school systems. That's a good place to start because schools have a lot of flat roofs. They need to save money. Every dollar you spend on dirty energy is a dollar you could be paying on teacher salaries. Why don't we cut our spending on dirty energy and start paying our teachers better? And by the way, you're showing the kids an example of doing the right thing, and you can include the solar in the curriculum. That's what they do in the Albemarle County schools, and that's what they're doing in Lexington Rockbridge. we need to start doing that in Stanton, and I think every community in the valley should say, we want solar on our schools. That's a great place to start your local activism.
Well, perhaps also, I mean, thinking through if our localities build new schools, let's build into the plans. So you could throw in, let's put solar into the plans for the new school. If you're going to build new buildings, whatever the case may be, if you're going to build a new courthouse, let's at least plan ahead and factor that into the cost. Those could be some ideas at least as far as that goes.
Not only is that environmentally responsible, but it's fiscally responsible.
Yeah, indeed. I guess we got about a minute to go on the show here. Re-elected this past May. A quick 30 seconds or so on what some priorities come up in the next 4 years for Stanton City Council might be.
So, number one, we're going to deal with this high school issue. Number two, if the county wants to work with us on the courthouse, we're very happy to work with them. Number three, development. And I think a lot of the things we saw in this election were people in rural areas sort of feeling left out of the economy, and I totally get that. Being in a rural area, being in a small town, a lot of people in America forget about us. And so I think we need to find a way to renovate, to rejuvenate, to have a rural renaissance that is maybe different from the way they do it in big cities. Maybe takes us back to some of the community and the local economic autonomy that we had in the past. And so I would like to see more of that happen in Stanton.
Well, it's been a good show. Got a chance to catch up with a good friend, Eric Curran from Stanton City Council. Thank you, Eric, for being on the show with us.
Thanks so much, Chris.
And Crystal, I guess we'll wrap up another week of Viewpoints here.
All right, we appreciate you joining us tonight and look forward to seeing you next week back on Viewpoints.